Professor Anita Taylor is Dean of Duncan of Jordanstone College of Art and Design at the University of Dundee. She's the founding director of the Trinity Buoy Wharf Drawing Prize, which has gone through several names but has been running since 1994, and is also founding director of Drawing Projects UK, which is a public-facing initiative dedicated to drawing. And I think, do correct me if I'm wrong, Anita, but I think that's been running since 2009. Yeah. So that's a lot of roles in itself to juggle. But alongside that, Anita is also internationally renowned artist who both paints, draws. I don't know if you define yourself by either of those medias or processes, Anita, but that's something I think maybe we could have a little bit of a chat about. So Anita, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Complete pleasure to be here. Shall I share my screen and then we're...
That would be great. Yeah, so just starting off, as this is really aimed at students, and we're trying to kind of talk about how the early stages of life lead into an education and then into a career. I wonder if you could just take me through some of that journey for you.
In terms of where I began, I mean, it's quite a complex thing to put together, and actually putting slides to it, I'm going to prelude this or preface it. Putting slides to it's quite hard. I come from an analog generation, and of course I actually took quite a stance about not taking photographs actually as a student. I always wanted to be in the present. So I have a whole gap. I've got lots of archives if someone wants to help me with them. So how did I get here? This is me as I think first year or possibly going into the second year student at what was Gloucestershire College of Art, now Gloucestershire University. And I come from a rural background. I and my brothers and sisters are first generation into higher education, the three or four of us that went on to higher education. And my parents bought a small farm, a very working farm. We lived in a cottage by the railway as a child. They bought a farm because they were from farming stock or worked on farms, and we lived in a kind of very rural, quite disconnected place near to Stoke-on-Trent. So I come from near the potteries, so there's a kind of visual design heritage that was inherent in what I do, but I didn't know that you could be an artist, that you could go to art school. Didn't really know about those things because the people who drew around me were actually painting ceramics in a factory, or they were doing other things. But we lived in a house that was very, it had been quite grand. It certainly wasn't grand when we moved there when I was about 5. And it was quite dilapidated. It rained in, it didn't have electricity in most of it. And it was really quite magical because it kind of was an open ground. But I'm the youngest of 4 by quite a long way. And to some degree, being the youngest of 4, I think probably gave a degree of freedom, and I always drew. But take that in the context of living in quite a rural context, being the youngest of 4, not much company because it was quite remote to a level of remoteness. And drawing was actually the thing that I did quite instinctively. So I drew, and I've always said that I've drawn my way through my career and my life and to become who I've been, because drawing was the thing that was at the heart of all of that. So I began there. My father died when I was 13. So we lived on a widow's pension. And my mother worked the farm with my brother. So she kind of managed the back end of things. So we were kind of, it was quite interesting. So we did all of that. I went to a non-selective comprehensive school. So I, not much sign here that I'm going to go to art school, but I drew all the way through that. I was picked up by the art department. It was a really, I drew, and that's what I was really good at. But my education kind of went slightly sideways when my father died, because it was when you were doing all your exams ready for choices about what you might do at O-level, GCSE, and on. So, you know, I was a kind of interesting case. Very bright. My siblings are very bright, very sharp, do different things. So one's went into agriculture, one into dentistry, one into finance. So we're quite different. And my mother, who I've taken the slide out of, my parents were born 1919 and 1920, so they lived through quite an interesting time. My mother's brothers died in the flu epidemic, so she also was the youngest by a long way because the middle children died. And so there was a big, and she worked worked for the NHS as they were being set up. So there's a very big commitment to social benefit, to appreciating everything that we had, and to building community. So I guess I have something in there. I've forgotten what you were going to say. So my journey to it isn't, I didn't really know you could be an artist. Didn't know there was such a thing. And when I went to art school, I certainly didn't think that you could teach in an art school, or I knew that you could teach in an art school, but there weren't very many women teaching. Mm-hmm. So there weren't any real role models at that time. So it was a very male dominated context, but Cheltenham was a brilliant place to be. From my A-levels, which I did a foundation course, which was totally brilliant. And I had tried, because we lived on a widow's pension, to go to art school straight from school. And of course, that was just not a very bright thing to do. I mean, I needed the expansiveness. I needed the foundation course to confirm that I wanted to be a fine art student. And on foundation, you know, we did the carousel, did the choices, the testing. I was advised that I really ought to do fashion and textiles, partly because that was what women might do, or girls might do. It was a very good foundation course, but it was a kind of bone of contention between the staff. And in the end, I applied to do painting at Cheltenham, which was a brilliant choice. It was a structured programme. It was a fantastic programme, and I had a great time, and I drew my way through Cheltenham, and I came out with the first. I did, you know, I went into the studios at 6 in the morning. I worked until 8 at night. I was with a group of students who were brilliant, all doing amazing things, and it was an amazing work hard, play hard culture, but it was incredibly supportive, and it enabled me to flourish, to have confidence, and to grow through the work, and to find a way of expressing that. I'm not showing you any images from that time because they all need to be transferred from slide, and some of them to be photographed. There are portfolios and piles of drawing because I drew voraciously. But I went to, I knew by that point I wanted to go to postgraduate, and I knew that I wanted to go to the Royal College of Art. Mm-hmm. I wanted to go to the Royal College of Art because Peter de Francy was teaching there and leading the painting department. He'd been there for quite some time by that point. I had met him through the teaching staff. He'd been to teach in Cheltenham, which was very well connected to postgraduate programmes. And you had to take a year out at that point in time to go to the painting department. He didn't take anybody straight from undergraduate programs. So I had a time out. I applied, because you applied after you'd left for the Royal College. And I, you know, stayed in Cheltenham. I found a studio, found a part-time job, and I worked there and applied and got in. And then I moved to London for 6 months before starting at the Royal College, and I worked for the civil service.
How was the experience of moving to London as well? I mean, that must have been a big change from Cheltenham.
It was it was a big change. I mean, yes, it was. And bear in mind my background, I hadn't really travelled very much until I went to art school. And it, you know, and I didn't go straight to London, partly from the advice from Foundation, which was that I think they didn't think that I was really, I don't know what they thought. But anyway, it was brilliant. It was a good stepping stone. Cheltenham, brilliantly connected, going to London, getting a job, just working, getting used to being in London. It was a brilliant thing to do. So it was about orientation, if you like, and having that period of time. I lived in a fantastic shared house in London. I had lots of peers who'd already gone to London to postgraduate, so I had friends there to stay. I could meet all sorts of people. I had somewhere to stay when I went house hunting. And, you know, I lived in a house in the end with 10 people. A fantastic house in southeast London with lots of amazing people I'm still friends with, like Mary Evans, Anthony Lamble, the theatre designer, all sorts of people, Ed Frith, and Caroline Salem, dancer and architect. It was an amazing place to be. So I met absolutely, as I did at Cheltenham, lifelong friends. And I worked, you know, for the Department of Health and Social Security funding the National Health Service, which is quite interesting. And I did that, and they, you know, didn't want me to leave. They thought really I should stay because I had a first and I'd have a great career in the civil service. But I kind of felt that I had my place at the Royal College. I was definitely going to go to the Royal College. And I was, you know, it was a brilliant experience, and I was there at an extraordinary time. I was first of the 2-year students. But we were there with a 3-year student, so it was a time of change. And I would say that's been something through my education that's been a characteristic. I mean, change is constant. I certainly felt it in those terms of progressing, and the Royal College was at that very odd time when, you know, there was a lot of change, and actually it wasn't really clear when we started that it was going to be 2 years, because Peter was absolutely certain it wouldn't be. However, I learned young about the politics of art school education. And we had a year of Paul Huxley as head of painting, so it was an amazing time. And, you know, I made big, ambitious work. I had drawn my way through my undergraduate program. And when I went to the Royal College, I kind of felt I wanted to learn to paint properly, or to express in paint. I kind of felt it was more important. I still drew, but I didn't really show them to anyone. And I can remember putting a drawing up on the stairwell in the old buildings that was behind the V&A then, or part of the V&A at the back. And someone just saying, well, who made that drawing? It was kind of, well, it was mine. And, you know, so I was constantly drawing. Making drawings really about the human condition, very influenced by German Expressionism, by Mexican muralists, by people like Frida Kahlo, people like Paula Rego, who was also visiting at the Royal College, and all sorts of things around, you know, the work was always about female identity, about the place in the world, and it always had a kind of narrative, allegorical extent. So,
was it still quite male dominated there as well? I mean, when you're talking about making work about that female experience.
Jenny Durrant was teaching that, and you know, people were coming and going. There were visitors, and Peter was actually rather brilliant at making sure that there was a full range of people teaching, but the permanent staff were all, apart from Jenny, I think were all men. You know, and but you could ask for people that you wanted to come in. So, you know, Paula came in, or Paula, and all sorts of people. So it didn't, and it felt, you know, absolutely international. I mean, you know, you had people there from all over the world in the painting department, and, you know, that was 1985 to 87. It was the most amazing cultural melting pot in terms of, you know, people bringing their experience from India, from Africa, from America, Canada, the rest of Europe. It was, you know, it was a deeply international, intellectual, practice-based place to be, and it was, you know, fantastic as an experience. Challenging, you know, as a student, you know, you're kind of moving one foot in front of the other, not really knowing quite what's happening to you. It's when you look back, I mean, you knew it was amazing, but you kind of didn't quite put all the pieces together. I think as a student, a lot of the things that we do in art education are kind of slow burn, and you're kind of filling people up with references and information, and sometimes it takes a while to understand. As I came to the end of the Royal College, I you know, had no idea what I was going to do. My mother had always told me that I could go to art school if I learned to type, which is how I ended up working at the Department of Social Security. And because I could make a living, I could pay to be. I didn't have, you know, anything to fall back on. And but I applied for the residency at Durham Cathedral because I just thought it was fascinating. Because I was interested in allegory, I was interested in symbolism. Thought it was an astonishing idea that you could spend 12 months in the studio with no remit other than to be the artist in residence. And I applied for it, and I remember getting the interview and someone saying, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I've got this interview," and then being quite shocked because, of course, actually, lots of really amazing people applied for it. You know, there were people being interviewed who were very senior. So I kind of went and thought, well, it's just going to be a great experience. It was a 2-day interview, and it was an amazing experience. It was just astonishing, and I couldn't have been more surprised or shocked and amazed to get a job, if you like, doing what I wanted to do. And of course, that led to all sorts of questions about what do you do. So this is a painting. The last was the drawing and a series of drawings that kind of absorbed the idea of thinking about human relationships and finding a way to respond to what I thought was essentially a space dealing with human challenge. And, you know, it was an extraordinary time to be in Durham. It was, you know, the end of the Miners' Gala. It was the first start of the conversation about female clerics. It was just an extraordinary time. But I started, and I had this 3-room studio, which was, you know, in the cathedral close. I lived in one of the university colleges. I worked at the cathedral. The college was female, the cathedral was male. I taught at Sunderland, so I had a day a week's teaching as part of it. And I was making paintings in one space that reflected on the idea of the cathedral. So Cuthbert's Lullaby was based on thinking about the idea of pilgrimage, which I had no idea that people still did. And people would pay pilgrimage to Cuthbert in the cathedral. But so alongside those drawings, which are very stark, very black and white, trying to find a way to construct paintings. They're very big, they're 8 foot by 6 foot. And then after Durham, which was amazing, it was a full 12 months teaching at Sunderland a day a week, living in the university, meeting astonishing people, working in the cathedral with extraordinary access, kind of struggling to think, I've got, you know, I am making. And it was an amazing thing to think about the responsibility of responding to it. And a solo show at the end, and accompanied by Giacometti show in the next gallery. So it was a stunning time. And then I applied, I was teaching a little bit. I'd already been invited to teach at Sheffield as a visitor by Anne Greby. And so I was doing a little bit of visiting teaching while I was at Durham. And I'd been invited back to teach at Cheltenham. And I applied for the fellowship there, which I wouldn't have done without it being suggested it wouldn't be unreasonable to do competitive. But the fellowship was an amazing scheme. And Michael Shin, who'd been the head of art he was when I was a student and a member of staff afterwards, had set up this scheme when they had a vacancy, and they'd split the salary to make 6 fellowships. So they had 6 people arriving every year in sculpture, printmaking and painting, coming from the postgraduate programs, given a studio, teaching a day a week. It was a brilliant grounding, and I'd had the experience of meeting, you know, 6 fellows every year as an undergraduate, and I did apply for it and got it, and it was a brilliant time. There were 3 painters, a printmaker and 2 sculptors, I think, in that year, and it was a studio in the college for the first time and teaching, and it was a great experience. And of course, I moved out of the darkness and the contrast and the tonality of Durham to something that was much lighter and brighter. And I've always been interested in the theatre of things. So these paintings are just some examples of some of the paintings I was making, which dealt with the luminosity, a theatricality of light, and really to do with highlighting critical moments, catalytic moments in relationships. So Stone and Honey actually is more of a painting of grief rather than anything else, but it's about And so my mother died in the early 90s, and it's very much about a kind of sense of setting out identities and the vestiges of things, and all these insects and things buzzing about the richness of that. I was also making big constructed drawings. Now, these are much more like the drawings that I was making as an undergraduate. So big constructed drawings, making drawings out of marks, defined images, but I made a series of drawings in the early, well, mid-90s around dishonourable deaths. There was a huge media furore over someone who I think is Sarah Thornton, who had murdered her husband, and it was kind of incessantly on the news, and it was because it was a murdering woman. I began to, the work quite often is about situating things that I'm reflecting on. And I kind of felt that I needed to think about how that would happen and how could it happen. And I actually went back to use the subjects from the Old Testament, Judith and Holofernes, Yael, Sisera, the unknown woman. And there were 3 drawings which are quite big, 150 by about 120 centimetres, dealing with this idea of dishonourable deaths and actually the intimacy that accompanies that, and thinking about how that might happen.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was going to say, at this kind of stage where you're making these large-scale drawings and paintings, did they both perform very different roles for you, or were they both just means of image making? Or
they perform slightly different roles. And for me, I mean, I guess my career as an artist has always been cast into this kind of odd place, because actually they do come together. And there is a complete sense about repositioning the female subject and reappraising and redepicting that from a female standpoint. But they play a different role and a different function. And actually, you know, when I left Cheltenham, I had I was showing in London at Berkeley Square Gallery. I had a very good, strong relationship, good selling career. I was part of Christie's Contemporaries. I actually had a London gallery career and was quite well positioned. They never really saw the drawings as something they would show. And then I have this other flip side where actually people show the drawings and then think about the paintings. And it was only really in 2017 when I had the solo show at the Customs House that we did have a conversation. If the gallery had been bigger, actually, we should have had the paintings and drawings together, because it would have the moment of making sense of it. But I was making these big paintings. This is actually as I'm taking it apart in the studio in the project space at Drawing Projects to put it in store, because they're huge. They're 12-foot paintings. And I was making them in, a very big, beautiful space. So I kind of worked my way through my career to originally teaching for 2 reasons. One, to earn money to do what I did. I didn't have any backstop to do it. No parents. No background, nothing at that point to enable me to make my work other than what I could do to fund it. And in London, when I was in London, I moved out to Gloucestershire when I was teaching at Birmingham. So I taught all over the country. I should probably go back on and talk you through that. Taught all over the country from 87 to 91. And I taught, from Central St Martin's to Nottingham Trent, Sheffield, Newcastle or Northumbria, Sunderland, Birmingham and Cheltenham. So I kind of rotated around the country out of London. And I got to the point where I was leaving London on Monday, arriving back on Friday, having done, 12 tutorials in each art school. And it was brilliant, and I couldn't not say no, because actually you never knew whether it would come again. Mm-hmm. And the other thing was that actually there still weren't so many women teaching. I was being employed because I was dealing with the female subject matter. I'd somehow find a niche in terms of teaching and being employed. And I had after Cheltenham, I was appointed as a 0.5 senior lecturer at Birmingham at Margaret Street, and had 2 years there teaching in the fine art programme. And it got to the point where it was 2 days in Birmingham, around the country, and I was living in London. I had a studio in London. I shared it with Tracy Emin, and we, so we had the studio together. I would leave, come back, meet Tracy, talk in the studio, and it would almost be my studio time was kind of petering out. And actually, when my mother died, I kind of just felt I needed to recenter, and I found somewhere to live in Gloucestershire. I found a studio in a set of mill buildings with some people that I'd been at the Royal College with, so Richard Webb and Judy Ingalls. And we had the top floor of a mill building in Stroud. And then finally, I found this dilapidated chapel and bought a chapel with my then partner. And this was my studio. So it might look quite nice outside, but inside you can see it looked a little bit dilapidated. But big, and with lots of space, very quiet, very secure, and a space that you could paint in and have a dialogue in the studio. So no risk of, somewhere you could leave your mind and come back to it, and pick it up where you left off. So I became head of painting in Cheltenham in 1991. I was 29. I was the second female head of painting in the country. I was probably also not far behind in terms of the younger one. Winchester led the way because it had Bill Wright as head of painting at 29 and Gillian Ayres as head of painting. So, there were kind of, I'm just saying in terms of being a woman and being young, or being young. And so I've inherited this fantastic painting department, all with staff that I had been taught by. And it was a brilliant place to be, and it was an amazing, it still had that generosity, which I think was set by the head and the people that had kind of been connected together. So I was there for, sorry, I'm probably answering far too long questions and not showing you any slides, because these were just really to give you a sense of what I was doing. So I had 12 years there, working largely as head of painting. I became head of fine art, and then I became deputy head of art, media and design before I left there. But it's where the drawing prize began. So, but maybe I should just show you a couple of images and you should ask me a question.
I mean, you've been answering them before I've been able to ask them. So,
sorry.
I'm happy to let you keep going.
I didn't know you could blow the whistle for me.
No, that was ideal. I'm just thinking it must have been, was it a responsibility that kind of weighed on you, being, just one of two female heads of painting in the country, and your age and things? I mean, did those things kind of weigh on you, or did you hold them more lightly?
I kind of felt that I'd been given, people had put their trust in me, and I had to live up to that. And there's a responsibility, there's a custodianship, and I didn't really, it is what happened, and out of that I came, I'm a facilitator, I'm a problem solver, and I arrived at a time where we had lots of things to solve because funding was changing, things were merging. And actually we were trying to hold on to something really amazing about an educational experience, which was this fantastic structured program through structured drawing, painting, etc. So in a way for me it was about custodianship. And actually someone I then met again much later on, I can remember saying to Michael Penny, who was at Baspar, because of course I was then meeting all these people as part of a fine art Association for Fine Art Education. And I can remember saying, I must be the youngest dinosaur in the country. And it was kind of like that moment. He said, just don't, keep being who you are, just be authentic and just do what you're doing. And it was very funny because it was really flippant, throwaway advice. But, it was right. It was about, about taking your space to gather things. I mean, I'm definitely somebody who wants to understand everybody's view on things and then to try and make sense of where we can get the best solution out of that we can. At the time, things are always conditional on all sorts of things. So, I grew my way through Gloucestershire. We set up the Drawing Prize with Paul Thomas, and I set it up as in 1994. We had the opportunity to take it on. the drawing I think that I've just shown you, but I can't remember the order of the slides now. This drawing had won the Malvern Drawing Award or an award in it in 1993. And we had conversations about taking on the drawing show at Cheltenham as a venue. And then we had conversations about taking that show on and adapting it and adopting it to become something else, which we ran with the students so that they could have experience of seeing drawing, looking at drawing, how to handle drawing, how open drawing exhibitions work, etc. And it was about finding a space for drawing. I'll park that. We'll come back to that again in a minute, I'm sure. But so it was very much, we built this kind of space for drawing through the open exhibition there, and it supported the teaching and the delivery, and we had amazing students, as there were everywhere I've taught. And by 2002, I'd been on the advisory panel for the Centre for Drawing at Wimbledon. They had the first MA in drawing in the country, and they had a job going, which I kind of resolutely thought I was quite happy doing what I was doing because I could get into the studio, I had a balance, I knew what I was doing, but I was really curious about it because it felt that there was something happening around drawing that the drawing show itself could add to, but actually my passion as somebody who drew, as somebody who connected, very viscerally to drawing, that seemed the right place to be. And I became the head of fine art, head of the school in 2003, early 2003, and then became the vice principal there, but working with the Centre for Drawing, all the things around drawing that they had. Mm-hmm. As vice principal, I worked with the principal and the whole team. We merged into University of the Arts London in 2006, and I became the dean and the head of Wimbledon and rolled out the Centre for Drawing across the whole university with Stephen Farthing. And then a job came up in Australia. So I went to Australia to be head of the National Arts School, which was a 2-year contract. I was very excited. It was about transforming, doing the project the other way to make an art school back into an independent art school. So taking it out of the New South Wales government to become independent. And it was a 2-year contract. I went actually as a member of the senior executive service, so back into working for government while we did the transition, and then became the chief executive as we transitioned out. And the reason to go there, because there was a passion for drawing. Drawing was at the heart of their curriculum. It's an amazing place. We set up a study centre for drawing. There was a gallery that always had a drawing show every year. Students drew at least a day a week, if not 2 days a week. And it sort of seems probably a little bit fusty at the time, but actually I I guess I like working with the underdog and to transform something, because the potential was enormous, and it is enormous. It's realised a lot of that potential now. These are all things that you set in train as a custodian, and off they go and grow into other things. All the way through, I'm drawing and making. I don't have, it's something that matters to me, that I still have that headspace, I still have my space. Mm-hmm. And to be a practitioner with the freedom that gives you within very limited means, might just be pencil, charcoal, paper, might be very small, could be very large, but it's actually the thing that's about connecting to the world and seeing what you're thinking.
So, I mean, this is a perfect image actually to kind of roll back from with kind of drawing as a focus, because one thing, I mean, as you're describing your kind of progress through this kind of life in drawing and painting and education, I said it earlier, but it feels that you're sort of planting all of these seeds from which things are going to grow kind of with your presence or without. And I wonder, particularly with the drawing prize, I mean, that feels like a very important time for drawing in the UK, because it seems like from that point about 20 or so years ago, 25 years ago, many things started to grow at that point that have now flourished. you know, the kind of Royal Drawing School maybe a little bit later, but the Drawing Prize as something really quite significant for the kind of UK now. I mean, I feel like that helps people to understand the current position of drawing, you know, in the kind of contemporary art sphere. Did you have an idea of how you imagined it growing, or was that more organic? Because you seem to have addressed some really systemic problems with the recognition of drawing, and I wonder how conscious that was at the time.
Conscious that something needed to happen, and conscious that I could make something happen, and conscious that it may happen and it might continue and it might not. I think being all the things that you learn as an artist or as an art student that you take with you into that career facilitate you to understand stepping into the unknown, but within a framework. And we built a framework for the drawing show, and we didn't know whether or not people would want to join in. Mm-hmm. And I guess there's a moment where you have the decision about you make something happen. And of course, if no one had joined in, we wouldn't still be doing it. So it was really about devising something as an artist, as a practitioner, as someone deeply committed to drawing, and actually not, you know, the one thing that sits in education, and maybe the one thing we don't talk about enough, is that people kind of label you with what you do, and that's how you will teach. And of course, it's nothing like that. Or it shouldn't really be anything like that. I mean, creating, you know, if I think about the students I've had and the things that you've taught and structured into that teaching so they understand systems of things and context, not just one way of doing it. It's really about giving people freedom of choice, and that's when they can choose their path. Actually, setting up the drawing shows, it has a framework, so we've established a framework, and that I've grown that framework. We've structured it into, you know, we adjust it all the time. It's never perfect, but it's doing more than one could have hoped. You know, 1994 was an awful long time ago, and you know, we started it without a lot of backing. And we needed to take a year out actually in the middle because we realised we needed to get funding to support this, because of course it wasn't something that quite an impoverished art department could support, but actually it was always about it being self-sustaining, and that meant that it needed support from outside so that we could liberate the impact of that on artists. I mean, there's still, you need to pay to submit, but actually it's minimised and it covers the cost of submission only. And that's how it goes from there. So no, I had no idea what it would look like. The fact that it's here, it's the 25th annual, but it's actually the 26th year of it. Mm-hmm. It seems astonishing to me, but I actually, and as somebody also said to me, I'd have got really, I just wouldn't want to be doing it. It's different every year, and the drawings are different every year. The reward of working with the people every year is huge, and working with students to understand how it works, working with artists, trying to support people through understanding what an open is. It's a huge privilege. And, you know, and while it's got legs, it's got legs. You know, when the Jerwood funding stopped, we did do an impact evaluation because we thought maybe it's time to stop. And all the feedback was, no, it's not time to stop.
And I mean, I think that really speaks to the community that you've helped to nurture around drawing. So I think you've spoken before about the Drawing Prize almost being like a conference for drawing, where people come together, they discuss drawings, they just show drawings, and they experience one another's approaches and attitudes to drawing. I mean, with that attitude of kind of community and of kind of collective endeavor, I mean, is that something that fed into your work at Drawing Projects as well? Because that, I mean, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about what you're doing at Drawing Projects.
The idea of building, I guess it's a community of practice, but it's actually a community of practitioners. Mm-hmm. For me, really matters, and that's to do with a sense of, you know, I've been very fortunate in the career that I have. It's not without its challenges. But I know how fortunate I've been. I also know how meaningful art and design education is. And if you're in art and design education, you live and breathe it on a daily basis. When people leave, that's when it gets difficult, because how do they build community? Because most people squirrel away either into a bedroom or into a corner of a studio. And I can remember borrowing, well, I was in somebody's studio while they were traveling in East London, and just thinking, I haven't seen anyone. This is the biggest studio complex in London. I haven't seen anyone all week. And you just have that moment of thinking, well, actually, how do you build community? It's not about, art it isn't made in isolation. You can't actually realize a show on your own. So the myth of the garret and everything else is crazy. People need other people to feed off ideas, and whether they're doing that through making and the work that they're making, or whether they're having it in conversation, or whether it's about understanding how you talk about drawing or art, really matters. And actually what Drawing Projects does is allow people to come and make together, either by working in the studios or as an artist in residence, or coming to drawing sessions, so life drawing and other kinds of practical sessions, coming to drawing discussions so that we hear how people talk about drawing, we can engage in a current debate, we can hear from really amazing people who are prepared, and the generosity that they give to drawing projects to support us in doing that, and then come and see things. And actually, it's got a conversionary activity as well, is that actually drawing isn't as challenging for people. It's as challenging actually, but people don't feel as challenged about it in terms of looking at contemporary art or contemporary visual work. So Drawing Projects allows people to make drawing, talk about drawing, see drawings. It's really simple. Mm-hmm. And it does that in lots of ways. So it was set up to run the Drawing Prize when I went to Australia. And then when we came back, I needed a live work space, because that's the only way I can maintain the practice, is actually to live in it, or live with it. And we found a building, and it was simply too big, but it gave us the opportunity. It was very cheap, but it was too big. And it gave us the opportunity to have live work, so build a community around. I'm actually quite interested in something that I kind of cottoned onto in Australia, is that actually there's a huge tradition of heads of art and heads of art schools just drawing with people and actually gathering people around them to draw. And we sort of forgot about that, I think, a little bit, or it happened in private pockets. I guess my sense is that it's for everybody, and that sort of comes from my background, that I wouldn't be here without the generosity of other people and their capacity to recognise that actually the way I best communicated was through drawing. Mm-hmm. And they facilitated me to learn to do it and to extend that vocabulary, and to position myself in the world through drawing. I actually think drawing, because it's something we do fundamentally and instinctively from a very early age, before we construct sentences and write, it's something that we've got a connectivity to. So it's something that is facilitated in that way. So I guess my sense is that Drawing Projects, we didn't know if, it's a bit like the drawing show, didn't know if it would work. We opened the door to see who came in, and it has a really healthy community of people using it. It has people working there with their studio bases there across art and design and other things. And it has a community. And I'm really interested in how we build community through different kinds of language. It also has poetry groups and music and other things too, which use the methodology actually of making art.
Cool. Are you starting something similar in Dundee? Is that something that I saw, or is that just gossip?
It's at the moment in very early stages. I mean, as you know, I'm no longer at Bath Spa, and partly Drawing Projects happened in Wiltshire because I moved back from Sydney to work at Bath Spa, and Trowbridge in Wiltshire's nearby. It's a fantastic location in Trowbridge. It's by the station, and we were able to build this thing. And like the Drawing Prize, we didn't quite know if it would work. I've already said that. but actually it built a community, and it's close to being a sustain. It is a sustainable ecology. COVID has presented its challenges, but it's actually got a real community at its heart, plus the extended community. I'm now at Dundee, and I need live workspace in Dundee because travelling now is going to be more complicated. But actually, we've been working with the council for a building, and we've found a building. Got planning permission in right now, and it's really to do exactly the same thing, but with a bit more structure around it in terms of actually knowing quite what we would do differently, how we would structure that. It's a bigger building, it's in the middle of Dundee, so the aim is to do that. It's got quite a long way to go yet, in terms of how we quite make it happen, but we've been really warmly greeted by the council. They see it as a positive, and a number of people in the community. So the aim is to have parallel programs, shared programs. Wiltshire is, very much at our heart and exactly what we want to maintain. But the idea is that we roll something out in Dundee, and that actually gives a rather lovely flow between Scotland and the Southwest, and that drawing is something that can do that. I mean, we've worked, we show people from all over the world in Wiltshire, and the same thing would flow through, and very much that we would, while we establish something there, it's very much about the conversation of the place that we're in that allows. So, Drawing Projects has wonderful poetry, wonderful music project, wonderful things, which are things that we don't run, we've facilitated, and we think they're really important.
Fantastic. And we've got a few questions, and just to answer Justine's very quickly, Drawing Projects UK is in Trowbridge, as Anita's just been describing. But Georgi has asked, why would you say that drawing lent itself particularly well to your exploration of human challenge and struggle, and has also asked about the scale at which you work, kind of why you work at such a large scale?
Well, they are about a kind of sense of people. They're about finding a place in the world and dealing with things which are quite frequently raw, and other things. Maybe I should be flicking through some other slides at the same time. I think for me, the black and white, the tonality, the malleability, mutability of charcoal is something that I work with in those terms. I think charcoal's carbon, it's simple, they're only paper and carbon, and they're very much about rendering in black and white, light and shadow. Light is, can be seen to be metaphorical or symbolic within them. So they're very much, that's where it sits within the drawings. I think the paintings do something else completely. They're more celebratory, more theatrical. In terms of the scale is really about apprehending the intimate in very public contexts. And that's been a constant, is that they're about being able to apprehend people, to relate to them in terms. I mean, I'm very interested in monumental painting, murals, Renaissance painting, all sorts of things, which are really about putting the human into a public context. So while my work doesn't sit in public context, it is about being in a space that you have to deal with that scale and that transition. It's about asking what it is to be human, through scale, through touch, and the way that you then that you engage with something else. So you're looking on this slide at a small detail of a big drawing, which is really about declaring that intimacy, I think, and poring over that. Probably not a very clear answer.
No, that was great. It was sat alongside your work, and I suppose continuing, Ray has asked if you'll talk more about the theatrical language in your work, and asked about sort of light and luminosity in your drawing and painting.
Yeah, I mean, the light for me is, that's the tool within all of the rendering that you reveal what you want to reveal. So they're not necessarily, they talk about observation and talk about taking information from observation, but they're constructed. So the light falls where I want the light to fall to give you the emotional emphasis that it needs in terms of the drawing. In terms of the painting, I am interested in theatre and a structured discourse around that. But the theatrical, the light is luminous. I've always wanted the paintings to be luminous and to, partly because again, they take a space in a different way. I mean, paint's very different to charcoal and drawing. It's not, it's soft, it's liquid. But the luminosity, I mean, you know, they're not like stained glass, but they are very richly luminous grounds on which things operate. So I guess it's about spotlighting an activity. It's about a focus.
Has your drawing always been monochromatic, where your painting is so colourful?
Not always, but largely. And it's sort of, I mean, I guess it does feel a bit like having two identities. But it's not. The thing that holds them together is really that symbolic nature of light. And I guess partly what interested me about Durham was I did religious studies at A-level and I'm not religious, but actually the symbolism of light is something that features through all sorts of literature and text, and that's actually what I'm interested in, is how we control light to reveal things that are important. And I think within the paintings, they are talking not about a confection, but they're talking about constructed realities. They're talking about things that couldn't really exist. So you're dealing with the moment of an exchange or the incident. You know, and I love the Tiepolo painting, you know, Tiepolo ceiling. So they're kind of trying to not steal, borrow elements which are about not having to ground the figure in observed, in the rendering of an illusionistic space, but they are about using elements of illusion and reference in order to talk about a human experience or exchange or relationship.
We're coming very close to the end, so I'm going to squeeze in a couple more questions, if I may. So Sarah Mercer from the RCA has asked, as a teacher, how would you respond to a student that says they can't draw? It's a good practical question.
Enable them to draw. Yes, you would always meet some who say they can't draw. I've spent a lot of time working with how do you surreptitiously get people to draw and to realise that they can draw. And the structured programme at Cheltenham had lots of strategies for that. So whether it's just about enabling people to enjoy mark making, because actually fundamentally most people do, unless they really don't like, you know, and there might be mark making in a very different way to messy charcoal. But actually it's really about giving people skills, facility and confidence, and actually a place of trust, a safe space to take risks, because when people say they can't draw, that's about not wanting to take the risk of not being able to draw very well in public. And that not being able to draw very well is a constructed view laid over from somewhere, and you have to unpick where that's from.
That's really interesting. And just actually, there are a couple of nice follow-ups to that. So Pooja and Dana, and I think these might be our last questions, but they kind of fit together, have asked about how you deal with your own self-criticism when you make work, and you know how you kind of get through that, whether you've destroyed work that you've made, and whether you could talk about that at all.
I showed you a slide of the studio in Gloucestershire with a drawing that I haven't finished yet. That was in 1990 something. And that drawing's been backwards and forwards with me to Australia quite a few times. And I still haven't finished it. I work on multiple things. So I work on things that may or may not get realised. And, you know, for some works, they're instant and they're fast, and some works are ones that you tease and chew your way through, and some things you'll never show to anyone. And some things are, you know, happily publicly consumed. I have a lot of work that people haven't seen for lots of reasons. But the critical self-judgment is the space, is the conversation you have with yourself in the studio, which is about what you want it to be. How is it working? Why is it working? Why is it not working? Etc.
I think that's a really lovely point to finish on, the critical conversation that you have with yourself in the studio. I feel like that's actually what we should all adjourn to now, to go and wrangle with ourselves through some drawing. But otherwise, I just wanted to say a huge thank you, Anita. It's been such a fascinating hour to hear you talk about your work.
It's been really fantastic to be here, and I hope it was interesting. And thank you very much for listening and for asking questions. So it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
I hope that you enjoyed this talk. It was brought to you by Draw Brighton and is part of an ongoing series of monthly interviews. Hit subscribe to be kept up to date with more. To support what we do and for more information about Draw, take a look at our Patreon via the links in this video.